Hi there, I'm Jonathan McNair,
And I'm Rod McNair.
and this is Brother to Brother. And it's our first video episode, so we'll see how this goes and if this works today. I hope for the best.
I'm already liking the radio version better.
It is easier in a way you don't have to worry about anybody watching you, isn't it?
Yeah.
I guess that is the point of this, is that some people will actually watch and benefit, though. Well, the topic for today, or the title anyway, is Feast of Tabernacles, How Do We Know Where God Places His Name? And to talk about this, I think, Mr. Rod McNair, you're in a perfect position because you're right in the middle of that decision-making process in church administration. So we thought we'd take this opportunity to talk about it because it is a facet of leadership in terms of, certainly, I think in congregations, for us to be able to show support by knowing what goes on behind the scenes. Yeah. We're then able to actually be supportive, be influential, be positive toward the decisions that are made, understanding what goes behind them. But I want to start off in that regard by telling the story of when Dad, one time years ago, when my father was in charge of church administration. And one day I was complaining, as usual, and so I was talking about, I don't know, a particular feast site and saying, why do we have a feast site there? Don't those people at headquarters, of course, Dad was responsible for church administration, so it was really talking about him. But I said, don't those people at headquarters, know what they're doing? I mean, don't they realize this particular location is not the best for this, that, and the other thing? And I was complaining, and finally he said, hold on a second. And he then proceeded to teach me about why different locations were feast sites and what went into the decision making. And yes, they had been thought about and all of that. So after about 10 minutes, as he explained a lot of the background, he stopped, and I just said, okay. So at that point, I understood there was more to it than I understood. And so anyway, I thought that could be the way it is sometimes, where we don't always know what goes into feast sites. So how do you choose? How do you choose feast sites?
Yeah, that's a good question. And sometimes we get feedback from members who might be wondering how we do that, and it's actually more difficult than you would think. By the time you think of all the parameters that we want to have a feast site, it's hard to find places that fit it perfectly.
What are some of the criteria that you use?
For example, we generally don't want to be in the middle of a big city.
Okay.
I've used the example of we would never put a feast site in the middle of Cleveland before.
Oh,
but then
ouch!
I'm sorry for all those people who live in Cleveland. I'm sure
That's
Cleveland is a lovely place. But you get the idea. We don't want to put it in the middle of a big city.
Okay.
Generally, and why? Well, because part of the feast is about being around God's creation, about being in a millennial atmosphere. That's what we want. The problem is, oftentimes the millennial atmosphere is very expensive. It might be up in the mountains. It might be, near some beautiful resort areas. Mm-hmm. So another criteria is having it cost effective as well, so that we can provide for a lot of range of different budgets. So how do you do that? Another consideration is ease of access to travel, either by highways or by airplane. But in order to do that, you have to be within at least pretty close to a metro area. And so these are considerations. Another one is, you could have a beautiful place that is really out in the country or up in the mountains, but then a lot of people may say, well, there's nothing to do. There are no restaurants to go to. You know, I'd like to be able to find a place to take my family for the day, or to get a nice bite to eat. And so, how do you balance all that? That's a challenge. But I think it also shows that when we do find sites that work, it really is God's hand in opening that up, because it's sort of when you talk about feast site selection, it's a niche market.
Sure.
That is not like anything, no other business enterprise or frankly, very few other groups are like us. I mean Church of God.
Sure.
We who keep the feast.
Have you seen an example where God clearly shuts the door, makes it clear that this place that seemed to be perfect, I don't know, maybe maybe even locally the people don't like us, or maybe there's the facility, for some reason it closes or something. Have you ever seen something that's a situation where it's, wow, this is clear, we're not supposed to be here?
Well, I mean, there a few years ago there was a time when the hurricane came and wiped out Hilton Head Island. So I think it was pretty clear that year we were not supposed to be there. But you know, we've also seen the other side of it. There are times when we've had, and I can think of a couple of examples, sites where we felt like, okay, we've been there a while. Maybe it's getting a little bit tired. Maybe people would like a break, or maybe it's just not ideal, and so we've actually tried to move it, and we've looked and we've looked and we've looked, and
like Hilton Head, maybe. It seems like Hilton Head.
Hilton Head is one.
Yeah.
Others there are some other similar ones, but where it's just like, no, the only door open is this place that we've been in for a while, and
Sure.
for whatever reason. So, which brings up the whole idea of how does God place His name?
Sure. Any new sites this year? I haven't looked at the list here in the last few days, but I think I did see a couple. What in the lineup this year? Are there new places that are?
We do have Glens Falls is one.
Yes. Oh, that's a beautiful area.
Yeah, we haven't been there. I think in Worldwide we were, or maybe in Global years ago.
Saratoga, we had one Saratoga Springs 1 year in Global, but Glens Falls, yeah, we went up there for an outing. But it's beautiful area.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. You got me started there thinking about the Adirondacks. Oh man, that's nice up there.
That should be nice. We also have one in Spokane Valley, which is east of Spokane, which is a new site this year. There might be one other one. There's one actually in I forget the exact name of the town, but it's a small area just across the border from Texas into Oklahoma. That will be a new one, and that's all that comes to mind. At this point.
Tell us about the process. So, from start to finish, what is the process over the course of a year to set it up so that there's a feast?
Well, it actually begins before a year. So ideally,
now, hold on a second, because a few years ago there was when Hilton Head, I think, was hit by the hurricane.
Yeah.
And then there was a site here in Charlotte, and my understanding is it only took about a week to organize and set up this feast site here in Charlotte, and it went really well. So my contention is maybe all you need is a week.
Yeah, you may be right. Maybe we're spinning our wheels all of this time.
Sorry for the interruption.
I wouldn't want to. If I were betting, I wouldn't want to bet on it. But
okay, sorry.
No.
Back to the question that I actually did ask.
So that is a good question, though. So if we can spin up a feast site in 2 weeks, then why do it before that? So here's a good.
I feel like your dad now. Okay, I feel like your dad explaining to me why what I'm saying is nonsense. Oh, go ahead.
Here's maybe a reason. So one of the things that we find, how do you have a feast site? Well, first you need a hall, and so oftentimes in the places that we're trying to find, if you can't nail it down a year and a half before, or even 2 years before your event, it's very difficult to find availability.
They're booked up.
They're booked up, and here's the issue. It's not so much that they're booked up fully for that 8 or 9 or 10 day period, but a lot of times the places we're going might have wedding events that are on the weekends, and those are really high dollar events for them. They get a lot of their income. People pay a lot more for that wedding than we would even for the whole week.
Sure.
So the problem sometimes is not that we don't have any dates available in a site, but we might have almost all of the dates except for the weekend.
Right.
And so we can't use it. So in order to get there and try to get our foot in the door ahead of time, we've really got to go 2 years out and try to have them final. Our goal is to have them finalized, let's say, sometime in the summer before, so that it's a year plus.
Okay.
So that for next year's feast, in 2026, we're trying to have those done by the end of the summer 2025.
So, two quick questions before we move to the next step. One, what is the ideal site? What is Mr. Weston aiming at in terms of the ideal? The numbers, the number of people at a site. What's the target, or is there one, or does it depend on the area? I know we don't have the big sites of 1,000 people like we used to, and it seems like that was by design.
Yeah, I think with COVID, we really sort of redefined what a good size is, because we used to have 800, 1,000 people, 1,200 at a feast site, but of course, all of that ended with COVID, and ever since then, we haven't artificially tried to keep our sites extremely low. But we have tried to limit them, let's say in the 400 to 500, 300 to 500 person. And the reason is, number one, that means that you probably have more feast sites, which means that you probably have them in a reasonable distance. Driving distance. Okay. The more sites you have, the closer each one is going to be to the higher number of people.
Sure.
The other thing
is, it's a means of serving our brethren.
It really is, as opposed to let's just have a mega feast, and a lot of people have 14 hours to drive there.
Sure.
And so that may not be a problem for a lot of people, but for some, it's just going to be impossible. Older people, it's very, very difficult. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we found is, a lot of times in a large site, you're not getting to know everyone anyway. And so even by keeping the numbers in the 300 to 500 realm, it probably does help even the dynamics of the site.
In terms of building,
in terms of bonding together and mixing. It's a very different dynamic to be in a group of 1,000 people than in a group of 300. And so those are some of the things that we've talked about.
I've noticed too with a smaller site, more people can be involved in serving because there's more opportunity. Every site you need ushers, you need people involved in every aspect of the feast, and smaller site you get more people involved, which is one of the great things about the feast, to be able to serve and be involved in the different areas.
Right. No, that's a huge plus. It does. Sometimes that means it's a negative in that if I'm a coordinator, maybe I don't have any piano players who have registered for my site, or any first aid people who have some qualifications. So one thing that we've tried to do to ameliorate that's a great word, by the way.
I like that.
Good word.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
This
good.
is a vocabulary building episode as well.
I'm not sure if
Does it
I
actually
exactly used it in the right way, but I think I know what it means. Anyway, so if you want to make things better,
that I understand.
yeah. So the last couple of years we have started to create a pool, so to speak, of piano players, of people who are involved in sound, and what we do is we communicate with those who have done it in the past, and we say, look, we'd like you to be in this group, in this pool, where if as registration is happening, if we find out that, hey, we don't have any piano players in a certain place, we want to be able to reach out to this group of people and say, hey, there's a need in, wherever, Pigeon Forge. Would any of you be willing to transfer to there? And so we're kind of excited about that, because what it does is it gives people who have some flexibility. Maybe they're planning to transfer, or maybe they're not, but if they have some flexibility and they just want to know where the need is, and then we can connect them up with a coordinator, and they can supply a need. So we're trying to expand that a little bit each year in terms of that group that we can communicate with.
What about chocolate? So what I mean is, yeah, chocolate. So when I was coordinating feast sites, I made it known that any pianists who came to our area, we would give them free chocolates.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Or
beer.
Well,
maybe.
Beer too. I mean, we can beer, but there, if you sweeten the pot a little bit there, I don't know. You might just try it as a technique, just a suggestion.
We might look into that.
You might look into. Back to the question about sites. Is there, in terms of finding the different sites, what's the? I mean, I understand that, for example, Tyler Wayne sometimes will go to different meetings to try to learn about different sites. Could you explain that? What's the process with that? I mean, before working as a coordinator, I wasn't aware that there was such a thing as Chamber of Commerce and some of these groups that actually do try to advertise their sites. Maybe you could explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, I would say that there are two main ways that we find out about potential sites. One is, as you mentioned, Tyler Wayne works in church administration in Festival. And by the way, Festival department is really just church administration, but with a different hat on it. It's run by Dr. Winnell, and we all work together under his overall direction.
And maybe this is a good time to ask about Mr. Weston's involvement too. I mean, you said Dr. Winnell is Director of Church Administration,
So whenever we do find a site that that we're looking at, that Tyler has done research on, and whenever we have to make a decision on one, it's not isolated just him and me or one or the other of us. We actually ask, and Mr. Weston, Dr. Winnell, oftentimes Mr. Wakefield, who is in charge of business operations.
How about local pastors? How do they get involved in the process?
Definitely. We often are asking for if they have any suggestions of places, or usually if we come up with a suggestion, we'll ask them to go take a look at it.
To check it out.
And we'll what do they know about it? Because they're going to know different things than we do.
Sure.
But so every site that we pick that is new is very closely evaluated by Mr. Weston, Dr. Winnell, Mr. Wakefield, and this whole team. Which is interesting that they take a personal interest.
Sure.
It's not just, we don't just throw a dart at a wall.
And ask questions, I'm sure. I think of Mr. Weston, you have to be prepared when you propose something to him because he will ask questions about it. So.
Right. I mean, looking at the overall cost for members, looking at the cost to the church, how is that balancing out?
Sure.
What is it like there?
Especially because he was involved for years and years in the field and feast sites, and so as a pastor, so he his questions will be very appropriate for really where the rubber meets the road. I find.
Right. So in order to find places or have ideas of places, I said before there are two sources. Really, there are three. Number one is sometimes if we need a feast site in an area, in a rough area, we'll talk to the pastors. We'll find out in their area where would they recommend. That's one. Another is Tyler will go to a yearly trade show, which is called the RCMA Religious Conference Managers Association trade show. And they have it different places every year. And in that trade show, in addition to educational breakout sessions, they will have vendors. In other words, they'll have hotel managers, local chamber of commerce people, and where someone like from the church, from Tyler, I've been to a number of them, but he normally goes to them now that he's here. They'll be able to meet up, and they'll be able to talk, and they have that you can walk around on the floor of the trade show, and they'll have their brochures, their booths, and so that's one place where you can get good contacts. Another is some years ago we got in contact with a let's say an agent who would we would talk to him, and he would find out exactly what we're looking for in a certain region, what are our parameters, what's the general price, what's our expected number. And so he did some work for us in a number of regions. Well, over time, we became aware of the programs that he would use in terms of the research, the search engines and research programs. And so as for example, as Tyler Wayne was able to become aware of those, he started using those tools himself, where now he can plug in and do a potential site request to 70 different hotels in an area, and online, and then maybe 30 of them get back and say, no, we don't have your dates, but maybe 15 say they do, and this looks like a good fit. They send proposals, we analyze them, we look at them. So that's pretty much how we get leads these days.
There's a lot to it. I think, getting back to my initial story about Dad, without being in the middle of it, there is a lot that goes on to make a decision that's good for everybody, good for the church, good for our members, manageable to us, where we can all be involved. All those factors. There's a lot that goes into it.
Right. And I think this is a good juncture to mention that sometimes we'll get requests from members. Hey, why don't we have a feast in such and such a place? Maybe it's a beautiful place. Maybe it's the weather is great. It's a vacation spot.
Hawaii or something.
It'd be wonderful. But oftentimes those places that are mentioned, there are no members there. There's no local logistical support. It's not serving local brethren. And so when you stop and think about it, you have to think, okay, well, what's the purpose of having a feast site there? Other than giving an opportunity for travel for those who may want to go there
And have the money to.
and have the money to.
So they're
That's
not
right.
necessarily even a benefit
right.
to everybody.
No, it really isn't. So as opposed to that model, what Mr. Weston has, and Dr. Winela as well, what they would like us to do is really, for sometimes people have the money to travel, and that's great if they do. Well, go to a place, let's say overseas,
Right.
where if we're talking about that. Go to somewhere where we have members.
Right.
Go to somewhere where there is a local church and they love to have guests.
Right.
And you can actually be building bonds with local brethren there. And there's a reason why there's a feast site there, because there's a church there. There are people there.
And oftentimes
There's
those people can't travel either. In our
Exactly.
international areas, they don't necessarily. I'm thinking particularly Caribbean and different places like that.
all over.
They don't
Yeah.
have the ability. They don't have the money to be able to travel far. Whereas
That's right.
some of our folks do.
That's right, and that's another point that I think is interesting to think about. Here in the United States, we have so much mobility.
Right.
We can just jump in the car and drive clear across the country and be in a totally different climate. We can see different sights. We can, do all those things.
It's relatively cheap. I mean,
And
compared
relatively
to
cheap.
flying from Trinidad to to Barbados or something.
Oh,
you
that's
can get in
right.
your car and fill up with 2 or 3 gas tanks and be halfway or better part across the country.
You're right.
It's
You're right.
cheap here to travel compared to a lot of places.
The normal model for our feast sites overseas is there's a country and there are congregations and there's a site in that country,
Yeah.
or maybe a site in that region of the country. And virtually everybody who attends in that country goes to that site
Every year.
single year.
Yeah.
And generally the same manpower, the same coordinator, for many years oftentimes, because we need them. And so that's just the way it is. So I think it is good for us in the U.S. once in a while to remember that what we have is unusual. And like you're saying, if we can travel, go somewhere and meet with people who can't travel.
Sure.
And be a part of their experience, and even be there to support what they're doing and what the local ministry is doing in that area. And it can be a great learning experience as well.
And they appreciate it. I've always found that it's much
Absolutely.
appreciated. Yeah, when you're talking about how I suppose we all have our idea where we'd like to have a feast site. I remember years ago when in the Northeast when we do surveys at the end of the feast, is where would you? It would say one of the questions, where would you like to have a feast site next year? And I always knew who was the person who filled out the form, because when one person would say, "Oh, I want Cape Cod, for example," and I said, "I know who that is. They live near Cape Cod. I know exactly who that is." And then it'd be another. Somebody else would write, this part of the region. I say, I know who that is because they like to have one near their house and
We
not
all
have to
want
travel
one
in
in our backyard.
So it's almost like the same survey where in terms of complaints, one person might say it was too cold, and someone else might say the hall was too hot, and all I could think of is I just wish they would have switched places, and they would have both been happy. So. Sometimes, anyway.
Yeah, no, let's face it, we're not going to please everybody.
Right.
And we know that.
But it is an objective to try to serve everybody.
Absolutely. And the idea being that the feast is commanded. And it's not a vacation. It's a commanded assembly. And yet it's a highlight of the year. So our job is to try to make it reasonable for the vast majority of people in the church to be able to go with relative ease, to be able to get to a feast site. So this might be a good juncture to talk about a little bit about how the last few years especially, we have encouraged people even who might transfer every year to just stop and think about it when they register, that their only criteria is not just where would I would like to go, but maybe that they could stay back and help out at the feast site where that's local to them. And because we do see for some sites, oftentimes about 50% of those assigned are going somewhere else.
Wow,
because
that's high. That's
it's
a big
pretty
number.
high.
Yeah.
And that does mean that the pastors, the local coordinator, oftentimes is scrambling a little bit for manpower.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're just asking people who let's say normally would transfer to maybe just stop and think, and before they plan their feast plans, talk to their pastor and ask the question, is there some way that I could help, or would there be a need for me to stay back?
That's a leadership role as well.
Right.
Sometimes there are needs that are there that are above and beyond, let's say, a local week-to-week church congregation, and it's an opportunity for the coordinator to actually give some responsibilities that are they're important, they're needful. But even serving, it's an opportunity for leadership, stepping out, being an example, exerting a positive, you might say, impact on the congregation, on the feast side, the people who are there. So it really fits with that leadership theme.
Yeah, and you're right that there are so many things. The feast is sort of ready-made for opportunities to serve. There are service crews. There are, so many different ways that we can get involved and help out. And so, and oftentimes there are genuine needs.
Right.
So we hope that more and more brethren will take the time to do that.
I wish that could be the default, honestly.
Yeah.
And then, back literally, I remember growing up.
Sure.
How many years did we go to Wisconsin Dells? 10 years. I mean, that was the feast for us.
That's right.
We looked forward to that. I remember growing up, as
Yeah.
I did. It was a wonderful time to be there at the feast again at the Dells. And during those days, actually transferring out from your assigned site was, it was a unusual thing. Actually,
it was unusual.
It was the exception to the rule because it's simply the system to be able to handle that type of thing was not doable with thousands of people. But I wish the default were for people to actually be part of the hosting process of their local site, and then again, maybe every couple 3 years, fine, go and visit another site. But it really is a great opportunity to serve and be involved and engaged. Really, that's a leadership. Even things like the choir, for example. I know sometimes, people think, well, choir is just, singing for fun or something. Mm-hmm. But it's actually, there's a need in every site. There's a need for people who are willing to put the practice in, to be in the choir. And so anyway, there are lots of different areas to serve and help, for sure.
Yeah.
What's your favorite feast site? Okay, we'll get personal here. What has been your favorite feast site? And if you can't think of one, least favorite. Well, maybe that's not fair. That's and you can't say I love all of them equally. That you can't say that. It has to be. Okay, let's rephrase it. One of your favorite feast sites. That might make it easier.
It's really hard to say because of every site has different factors, etc. But actually, I think the thing that comes to mind to me is what you just mentioned a few moments ago, that we went to Wisconsin Dells growing up, year after year after year. We played in the orchestra, year after year after year. I look at those as some of the most exciting feasts that I've been to. Of course, growing up and as a preteen and as a teenager, and we were serving, we were working hard, we were going to practices. But I would say Wisconsin Dells growing up.
What's one thing that you could say would be of help to the festival department if there were one thing that you could ask of people that they would do, what would it be? In order to make your job and those who are working on this, the Feast of Tabernacles plans, easier.
So this is always helpful. As we get closer to registration, we always ask everybody in the World Ahead update to check your username and password in the cogl.org system. Why is that? Because oftentimes, if someone is having trouble registering, the problem is no more complicated than just there's something wrong with their username or their password. And if we could have gone through that 2 weeks before registration, it would save them frustration. And so that is a huge thing in the weeks leading up to registration, which will take place after the spring holidays. If everybody can go on MyLCG and log in, and if you have any trouble logging in, then let us know.
Right.
Go through that process.
And actually, at the bottom, usually if you go to mylcg. Is it mylcg? Well,
it's actually cogl.org.
And then go to where it says MyLCG, the little button, right? There's at the top left, it says MyLCG, I think.
I believe so, or it may say log in or whatever. Yeah, it might be. I think it does.
So, like you said, if they put the PIN number or their username, either will work in that name box, and then the password. And I believe that if a person does that, and a box may come up that says this is not working.
Yeah.
It says something like that.
Yes.
In more in technical terms.
Yeah.
At the bottom, there's one you can click on a box that says reset my password, I believe. And that way, in other words, it may just be forgetting your password.
That's right.
And
it might take, I don't recall the process, but it might take a little time for that to be set. So you want to do it
well in advance.
So you're not waiting for it when you're trying to register.
I find because that's the same process to log into the Living Education courses.
Okay.
Same exact box. And I know many times it's simply that people don't know their username or password. And there's a mechanism right there if they click on it that but they have to know their PIN number.
Yeah.
That's on the literature or the username they changed to.
And as you said, I think either one will work.
That's right. If they click on reset my password, then it will bounce back an email and it'll help you reset. Many times people will struggle, and that's the process we'll take them through, and then they're fine. Then again, it's not something that we use every day.
Right.
So so if it can be done ahead of time, then that makes things easier. Yeah. Okay, very well. Well, anything that you would like to add before we wrap up then?
Just that it's always a thrill, I think, for us in the festival office to be sort of building the infrastructure behind the scenes in conjunction with the coordinators, to be side by side with them. And then to see it come together, and then to actually be at opening night as everyone is being told, we're going to be starting services in a few minutes, please find your seats. And then we all sit down, and then we start the first song on opening night. It's just such a thrill for us to have had a hand in the background that is making that possible for everyone to enjoy the feast, to be hopefully somewhere where they want it to be relatively, and to be worshiping God together. It's a real privilege that we enjoy doing.
Very good. Well, I think that does it for our time. And so this has been Jonathan McNair
and Rod McNair.
And this has been Brother to Brother. Take care.
Bye-bye.